During the family cruise I paid for, my son looked me in the eye and said, "Stay in the basement cabin, you don't belong upstairs with us." I swallowed back my tears and kept smiling. Days later, a turn of events on board changed everything. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. 4 years I saved every spare coin from a tight budget. I sold cakes, mended old clothes, and took on small jobs, always with one quiet goal: to bring my family together for a special trip. The cruise was the symbol of an old dream, a promise I made to myself after my husband, Robert, passed away. When I bought the tickets, it felt like I was also buying a piece of happiness. I wanted to see everyone together, smiling like in the few old photos I keep. On the morning of our departure, my heart seemed to beat in time with the waves. I carried my suitcase carefully, as if it were made of fragile memories. Noah and Sophie ran along the platform, their eyes shining with excitement. Their joy was a balm, a reminder that it had been worth saving for so many years. I waited for a hug from Claire, but she just gave me a quick smile and looked away. A pang of strangeness shot through me. When I saw Aaron, my chest swelled with pride. He was the boy I had raised with so much effort, now a man with an elegant posture. But his hug was brief, almost mechanical. His gaze seemed to look right through me, as if he were focused on something beyond my presence. I felt a distance that didn't fit with such a long-awaited moment. Still, I tried not to let it get to me. The ship loomed before us, majestic like a castle on the water. I wanted to believe it would be the setting for a silent reconciliation, where old family wounds would heal without anyone needing to speak of them. Every step up the gangway seemed to bring me closer to that hope. Even so, there was a tension in the air that I couldn't explain. When Aaron placed his hand on my shoulder, I expected to feel affection, but something in the weight and firmness of his gesture made me hesitate. It was as if there were a hidden message in that touch, a message my intuition picked up before my reason could decipher it. But something about the way he held my shoulder, it felt more like a warning than a caress. Upon receiving my key, I noticed the number didn't match the others. A steward led me through increasingly narrow hallways until we reached the lowest level of the ship. The cabin was small, windowless, with a faint smell of dampness. There was no sound of music or footsteps from other passengers nearby, only the constant hum of the engines. I tried to smile at the staff member, but my voice came out weak as I thanked him. I left my suitcase in the corner and sat on the bed, feeling the ship sway more strongly down here. I asked myself if there had been a mistake, but I quickly dismissed the idea. Aaron and Claire knew where I would be staying and hadn't said a word. Perhaps it was just temporary, I thought, a logistical issue. I didn't want to cause trouble at the beginning of the trip I had dreamed of for so long. At night, when I went up to explore, the sound of laughter and conversation came from an elegant lounge. I recognized Sophie's voice among the giggles, mixed with the soft music of a piano. For a few moments I stood at the doorway, watching my family from afar, surrounded by other people, all well-dressed and holding glasses. No one seemed to notice my presence. I returned to my cabin early, trying to convince my heart not to feel the weight of that distance. It was as if the ship had two worlds, theirs bright and festive and mine silent and isolated. I wanted to believe they would soon call me to join them, but up to that point it hadn't happened. The next morning I decided to walk on the deck to get some fresh air. The sun reflected on the sea like a golden mirror, but inside me there was a fog. I found Aaron alone watching the horizon. I smiled, happy to have a moment alone with him, but his expression didn't match my gesture. He seemed to have something to say, and my intuition warned me it wouldn't be pleasant. In a cold tone, he asked me to avoid appearing in the trip's photos. He said it was to maintain the harmony of the composition, as if I were the wrong color in a perfect painting. I felt my stomach turn, but I remained silent, trying to understand. Before I could react, he turned away, as if wanting to end the conversation. It was then that he added, almost in a whisper, but firmly enough to take my breath away, "Stay in the basement cabin, you don't belong upstairs with us." The words fell on me like stones, each one sinking my will to fight back. I didn't know where to put my hands or how to keep my composure. I looked at him, searching for any sign of regret, but his face was impassive, distant. All I could feel was a mixture of shame and disbelief. The images of all the years I had sacrificed so he could have more than I did dissolved before that gaze. When I returned to the cabin, I sat on the bed and hugged my own shoulders, as if trying to prevent my heart from shattering completely. That night, I cried in silence, as if my soul had been cast out from the family. The meals, which I had imagined would be moments of sharing and conversation, became a silent parade of plates and silverware. Aaron and Claire sat side by side, exchanging comments between themselves, rarely including me. When I tried to start a conversation, the answers were short, as if the time they spent with me were an inconvenient interval. Each day, the barrier between us seemed to grow thicker. My grandchildren, once a source of laughter and stories, were now engrossed in luminous screens. The quick tapping of fingers on glass replaced the sound of our conversations. I tried to talk about places on the ship worth visiting, but my words fell into a void, like stones in a bottomless well. I wondered if it was always like this, or if this was reserved just for me. I observed quick glances between Aaron and Claire, like silent codes I couldn't decipher. There was something implicit, a mutual understanding that left me out. This feeling of exclusion was sharper than any harsh response could be. The food lost its flavor before it even reached my mouth. At the end of the meals, they would get up before I finished, as if they had urgent appointments. I would be left alone at the table, the sound of plates being cleared by the crew serving as the soundtrack to my loneliness. The ship felt far too large for the small space they gave me. On the third night, I realized they didn't even wait for me to eat. The next morning, I decided to have breakfast alone on the deck, seeking a bit of air that wasn't laden with indifference. It was there that I met Deborah, a woman with a shrewd gaze and an easy smile. She struck up a conversation without ceremony, asking if I was traveling with my family. I hesitated before answering, but her welcoming manner made me open up a little more than I had planned. We talked about children, about the weight of aging, and about how sometimes the ones we love most can be the ones who diminish us the most. She told me she had been traveling alone for years by choice, and that she had discovered a kind of freedom in her own company that she hadn't known before. Her words touched me like an unexpected breeze. Deborah had an ironic sense of humor that drew out laughs I didn't even remember I still had in me. Between one cup of coffee and another, I realized that, for the first time since I boarded, someone was listening to me without rush, without judgment. I didn't have to measure every word for fear of being a bother. We walked together until lunchtime, and I realized there was something comforting in having a friendly face in the midst of this trip that was beginning to feel so hostile. It was as if the ship had gained a new corner, a refuge not on the map. In the late afternoon, I was walking down the hallway leading to the more luxurious cabins, looking for a shortcut to the deck. That's when I heard familiar voices coming from a slightly ajar door. I stopped instinctively, not to eavesdrop, but because I recognized Claire's laugh. What I heard next made my entire body freeze. She was telling Aaron that they had only brought me along because it would look bad to leave his mother behind. She added, with irony, that at least I was useful for composing the happy family image they posted on social media. Each word seemed to tear a piece of me away. Aaron didn't contradict her. On the contrary, he agreed with a sigh, as if carrying my presence was a burden. I felt a tightness in my chest so strong that I had to lean my hand against the wall. The reality was naked and cruel. I wasn't a guest, I was an obligation. I backed away slowly, afraid they would notice my presence. Each step was heavy, as if I were exiting a stage I should never have been on. Everything I had dreamed of for this trip was dissolving like sea foam. Tears burned in my eyes, but I managed to reach my cabin before letting them fall. So, I was just a prop in a play for them. I spent the day with a fake smile plastered on my face, trying to convince everyone, and myself, that everything was fine. But inside, every word I heard in the hallway hammered like an echo impossible to silence. I remembered the piece of jewelry I sold, a wedding gift from Robert, to make up the final amount for the trip. At the time, I felt proud of the gesture. Now there was only a bitter taste. On the deck, I watched Sophie playing from a distance, her laughter full of innocence. How I wanted to run to her, hug her, and forget everything. But the fear that they would push me away with a cold look kept me rooted to the spot. I was an invisible spectator to my own family's life. Every time I crossed paths with Aaron or Claire, I felt the weight of an invisible wall built between us. A wall made of indifference and shame, built brick by brick over the years. I wondered when I had lost the right to be by their side. I tried to distract myself by looking at the sea, but even the horizon seemed too far to reach. The emptiness I carried inside me couldn't be filled with beautiful landscapes. There was a hole where the pride of being a mother and grandmother once lived. For a moment, I imagined disappearing into that vastness, vanishing without a trace. I wanted to disappear, but I didn't want to give them the satisfaction. The next morning, I went to the ship's cafe early to avoid the awkwardness of meals with Aaron and Claire. As I drank my tea, Noah appeared shyly and sat down beside me. He said nothing. He just held my hand for a few seconds. The gesture was brief, but it was enough to warm something I thought was frozen. His silence wasn't empty but full of meaning. It was as if he was saying that even without words, he recognized me as an important part of his life. We sat there just watching the movement of the restaurant. Claire and Aaron were on the other side of the room, busy in conversations with other people. Perhaps they hadn't even noticed his absence. I didn't want to break that moment with questions or advice. I just held his hand back, trying to convey all the strength I had left. It was a silent but real bond that not even the coldness of the others could erase. When he finally let go of my hand, he looked at me in a steady way, as if he wanted to leave a message engraved in my memory. His gaze said, "I see you." That afternoon, Claire announced she wanted to do a photo shoot on the deck, with everyone dressed in light colors. I was happy with the idea, imagining that at least this time I would be a part of it. But minutes later, she handed me the camera and asked me to be the photographer. I feigned a smile, hiding the sting in my chest. I arranged them in the frame, correcting poses and angles, as if it were natural. Aaron held Sophie, Noah gave a forced smile, and Claire positioned herself in the center, radiant. The scene was perfect for any album except mine. As I adjusted the focus, I felt a tear escape. I quickly disguised it, wiping my face as if fixing my hair. No one noticed, or if they did, they pretended not to see. I was just part of the equipment, not part of the scene. Behind me, a ship employee watched in silence. His look wasn't one of pity, but of understanding. It was as if he had seen this story many times before, with other faces and other names. When I finished, I returned the camera and walked away slowly, feeling that with each click, my place in the family was dissolving a little more. In the camera's lens, I was slowly disappearing. I woke up early, determined to try one more time to create a moment of togetherness. I mentally prepared a little script, imagining all of us walking on the deck together, feeling the breeze and the morning sun. I found Aaron and Claire in the hallway, the grandchildren a few steps behind. I smiled, holding on to hope like someone holding a full glass, careful not to spill it. "I was thinking we could all take a walk on the deck today all together," I suggested, trying to sound casual. Claire didn't even hesitate before replying that they already had premium level activities scheduled. The way she said premium level was like a wall erected between us, making it clear I wasn't included in that world. Aaron limited himself to a "we'll see later," without even meeting my gaze. His later carried the same weight as a never. I felt that small flame of expectation extinguish before it could even reach the open air. I stood in the hallway as they walked away, their laughter echoing like a constant reminder that I wasn't part of that sound. With each of their steps, the silence around me seemed to grow denser. I continued walking alone, watching my reflection in the glass. Even my shadow seemed out of place in that hallway. Later, I found Deborah sitting near the deck, distractedly stirring her cup of tea. When she saw me, she motioned for me to join her. We talked about simple things until suddenly her tone changed. She said she knew Claire from before. She revealed they had met years ago at a charity event where Deborah had been invited to speak. She remembered being treated with coldness, as if her presence were an inconvenience. She looked me up and down and turned her back in the middle of my sentence, she recounted, not hiding the irony. She also said that on the first day of the cruise, she recognized the same fake smile she had received that night. The kind of smile that wears politeness but sheds respect. It was like seeing an old mask being reused for a new occasion. As she spoke, pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. The way Claire treated me wasn't an exception, but part of a carefully maintained pattern. I wasn't exaggerating. The confirmation from Deborah brought a strange relief, as if part of the weight had lifted from my shoulders. If she had hurt others, the problem was never me. The next day, Deborah invited me to a dance class for seniors on the main deck. At first, I hesitated. It had been so long since I danced that I couldn't even remember if my feet still knew the way. But her encouragement was enough for me to accept. The instructor, an energetic man with a quick way of speaking, guided us through simple steps. In the beginning, my movements were timid, as if I were apologizing for taking up space. Gradually, however, the music began to undo that rigidity. It didn't matter if we missed a step or laughed at the wrong time. There, no one was interested in judging. For the first time since boarding, I felt my body respond with lightness, as if it too had been waiting for this moment of freedom. The gazes that met ours were kind, devoid of comparison or contempt. I realized that the value of being there didn't come from who was with us, but from how we allowed ourselves to exist. When the music stopped, I was out of breath, but more alive than I had felt in a long time. On that dance floor, I existed whole. I woke up with the feeling that the day would bring something different. It was my birthday, and although I didn't expect parties or gifts, I imagined at least a simple gesture, a sincere happy birthday. I spent the morning trying to convince myself that if it didn't come soon, it would come at dinner. I remained silent, as if that would make the moment more spontaneous. The day passed amid hallways and quick glances, but no special words were said. At lunch, conversations remained oblivious, and my name wasn't even mentioned. I decided not to insist, not to humiliate myself by asking to be remembered. I felt the weight of the day transform into an invisible burden. When night fell, I went to my cabin early, avoiding another round of laughter that didn't include me. It was then that I heard a soft knock on the door. When I opened it, I found Deborah holding a small plate with an improvised cupcake, a crooked candle stuck in the center. The flame flickered, but her smile was steady. She sang a quiet happy birthday, almost whispered, as if she wanted to preserve the intimacy of that moment. My eyes filled with tears, not for the cake, but for the gesture of remembering. She blew out the candle with me and holding my hand said, she looked me in the eye and said, "You are still here. That's enough." The next morning there was an early knock on the door. When I opened it, I saw Sophie holding a colored piece of paper with both hands. Without saying much, she held it out to me. It was a simple drawing made with wax crayons. Me holding her hand, both of us smiling. "This is for you, Grandma. I want you to keep it," she said, before hugging me tightly. The childish drawing had a power that no photograph could capture. There I was present, alive, part of her world. I looked at every color, every detail, and realized that even without understanding all the tensions around her, Sophie saw me with genuine affection. She wasn't just drawing a scene, she was documenting a bond. I hugged her for longer than usual, engraving in my memory the sweet smell of her hair and the warmth of that embrace. It was like receiving a ray of light in the middle of a storm. I kept the drawing carefully, promising myself I would never lose it. Between the crooked lines, my name shone. That night, ready for bed, I noticed a folded piece of paper slipped under my door. I picked it up curiously and upon opening it, immediately recognized Noah's handwriting. The words were short but heavy with meaning. "Sorry for what my dad said. I like having you here." The note trembled in my hands, not from the cold, but from the silent strength of the gesture. Noah didn't have to write that. He did it because he wanted to. It didn't erase the wounds, but it built a small bridge over them. I sat on the bed and read it several times, as if the letters could fix themselves to my chest and protect me from future storms. I thought about replying, but I was afraid of exposing him to the watchful eyes of Aaron and Claire. Gratitude flooded me, and the tears came this time without pain, just with the sweetness of knowing there was still love there. That piece of paper was worth more than any expensive gift. I held it to my heart, feeling the coldness around me recede, even if just for a moment. Perhaps love can survive, even when surrounded by ice. The next morning I found Deborah on the deck, laughing at something a waiter had just said. The sky was clear, and the sea looked like an endless blue carpet. I asked an employee to take a picture of us. We stood side by side, and the smile I gave wasn't forced. It was sincere, born from the relief of being near someone who truly saw me. When I looked at the image on the screen, I saw two women who seemed to be their own masters, free, serene, with the breeze gently messing up their hair. It was different from any picture I had taken since the start of the trip. There were no imposed poses or calculated expressions. I decided to post the photo on my social media. I wrote, "Happiness lives where there is respect." Within minutes, supportive comments started pouring in from friends and even strangers. People who had never met me in person but who felt the truth in that smile. As I read the messages, I realized I was being seen in a new way. Not as the silent mother or the discreet grandmother, but as Elizabeth, a woman with a history and dignity. The contrast with what I was experiencing on that ship was stark. I smiled to myself, feeling that this snapshot held more than just a memory. Finally, I was seen. And not through the eyes of my family. In the afternoon, I went to the reception desk to clarify a charge I didn't recognize. Upon reviewing my travel account statement, I realized that part of the money I had transferred months earlier had already been moved even before we boarded. I asked for details. The employee, unaware of the context, explained that the transaction had been made to pay off Aaron's personal expenses, linked to his card. My name was listed as the source, and the amount matched part of my savings intended for the trip. I felt the floor tilt, as if the ship had lost its course. It wasn't just the pain of being marginalized. It was also the feeling of having been used as a resource. The trust that remained shattered right there, in front of the cold numbers on the screen. I returned to my cabin in silence, trying to organize the outrage growing inside me. I didn't want to explode. I wanted to understand just how far this line of disrespect could go. And the answer seemed to be endless. The love I had felt for years now mixed with something I couldn't name. I wasn't a mother. I was a resource. I decided I wouldn't react hastily. I opened a notebook I carried in my suitcase and began to write everything down. Dates, times, words spoken, situations I had experienced since we boarded. Every detail was a piece of a puzzle I intended to present to the cruise management. Deborah, seeing me writing, asked why. I told her what I had discovered, and unsurprisingly, she encouraged me. "You are not alone." Her words were like a foundation, strengthening my decision to seek justice. For years, I had accepted veiled insults and heavy silences as a natural part of life. But in that moment, I realized there was nothing natural about being treated as disposable. I had the right to defend myself. The simple act of writing gave me a sense of reclaiming a piece of the control that had been taken from me. It was as if each line was a step out of the shadow where they had put me. I closed the notebook firmly, feeling that something inside me was finally rising. I will no longer be a forgotten name on a payment list. I chose the late afternoon to ask Aaron to talk. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky orange and gold, but the beauty of the scene didn't soften the weight I carried. When he approached, I took a deep breath and was direct. I told him about what I discovered at the reception, about the money used without my permission. Aaron sighed, trying to seem calm, and said it had been an emergency, that he would tell me later. His voice sounded rehearsed, like someone who had already prepared for this conversation. There was no regret, only the expectation that I would accept his justification without question. Before I could respond, Claire appeared, her face tense. "You need to stop causing trouble, Elizabeth. Are you trying to ruin everyone's trip?" The accusation cut through the air like an invisible blade. The sound of the waves competed with the sound of my indignation. Other passengers passing by slowed down, sensing the tension. I could feel my heart racing, but I stood my ground. It wasn't just about money, it was about respect or the lack of it. Aaron and Claire exchanged knowing glances, as if they were aligned against me. In front of everyone, they called me ungrateful. Deborah, who was just a few feet away, heard every word. She approached without hesitation and in a clear voice, addressed not only me but everyone who was starting to watch. "Ungrateful? She paid for this trip, and you treat her like a burden." The silence that followed was thick. Passing passengers stopped to listen, forming a small circle around us. Deborah didn't lower her tone. On the contrary, she spoke in a way that no one could pretend not to understand. "Don't you realize you're humiliating your own mother? That's uglier than any debt." Claire tried to interrupt, but Deborah raised her hand and continued, listing the small and large exclusions I had suffered since boarding. It was as if someone had turned on a spotlight on a stage where they didn't want to be exposed. Embarrassed glances began to turn towards Aaron and Claire. I felt the heat rise to my face, not from shame, but from relief at not being alone in that moment. With every sentence from Deborah, I saw their facade crumble. The masks began to slip. A little later, Deborah took me by the arm and said, "Come with me." We walked to the captain's office, where a crew member announced our arrival. Captain Herrera received us with an impeccable posture but an attentive gaze. Deborah spoke first, recounting all the incidents she had witnessed, from my isolated cabin to the misuse of my money. I, still shaken, confirmed every detail, trying not to let emotion swallow my voice. The captain listened without interrupting, his fingers laced on the table. When we finished, he took a deep breath and said, "I understand the seriousness of what you're telling me." He asked me to remain calm, assuring me he would take the necessary measures. I wanted to believe him, but a part of me, hardened by so many disappointments, still doubted. After all, how many times had they promised to take care of me and nothing changed? But there was something in his tone that sounded different, firm and honest. He said, "On this ship, dignity has no price." The next morning, an official message from the captain summoned Aaron and Claire to the meeting room. I wasn't present, but Deborah, always attentive, managed to tell me later. Captain Herrera was direct. He knew about the misuse of my money and had proof. He also mentioned the reports of humiliation and exclusion I had suffered on board. Aaron tried to justify himself, saying it was a financial misunderstanding, and that he intended to reimburse me. Claire, with a tense face, claimed it was all just exaggerated drama. But Herrera was not swayed. His posture was that of someone accustomed to maintaining order and justice on his ship. He made it clear that in that space everyone should be treated with respect, regardless of titles, money, or kinship. He said their actions went against the values of the crew and the company itself. The couple looked at each other, uncomfortable. For the first time, there was no audience willing to applaud their versions or soften their mistakes. This time the authority was not in their hands. For the first time they were treated like adults, and not like they owned the world. The decision came the same day. Aaron and Claire lost their access to the VIP lounge, the exclusive restaurant, and private events on board. The captain determined that, from then on, they would travel as any other regular passenger. Meanwhile, I was called to the reception. They informed me that, by order of the captain, I would be relocated to a luxury cabin with a balcony and an ocean view. There would be no additional cost. I was silent for a few seconds, trying to absorb the change. The crew began to treat me like an honored guest. A waiter called me by my name and asked how I would like my breakfast. Small gestures that added up were enormous for someone who had spent days being invisible. I felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. It was as if the ship had turned upside down, and suddenly I was on the bright side. Even in the simplest details, the difference was noticeable. Even the waiter smiled with genuine kindness. In the following days, I enjoyed every moment as if I were rediscovering the trip. Deborah, Noah, and Sophie became my constant companions. We took walks on the deck, took pictures, and I even attended a show in the ship's theater. With them, I didn't have to measure my words or hide my emotions. Noah smiled more, Sophie laughed loudly, and Deborah seemed pleased to see me flourish. The weight I had carried until then began to dissolve in the salty wind that hit my face. I noticed that even when I crossed paths with Aaron and Claire in the hallways, I didn't feel anger. There was just a healthy distance, a certainty that I no longer depended on their gaze to exist. The photos I took on those days weren't to prove anything to anyone. They were for me to remember that even in rough seas, I can still find a safe harbor. When I looked at the sea, I realized I was on the same ship, but I was no longer the same woman. In the days that followed, Aaron and Claire were rarely seen at events. When they did appear, they kept a low profile, almost always in the corners, avoiding long conversations. The air of superiority they had displayed before was gone. Now they walked with measured steps, avoiding curious glances. I watched them from a distance, not with anger, but with the serenity of someone who has finally broken free from an invisible chain. It was like watching a play where, for the first time, I didn't have to act. Deborah noticed and smiled slightly. "They're not the center of the stage anymore," she commented quietly. And indeed, the focus had shifted. My world no longer revolved around them. There was a strange lightness in being able to pass by them without my heart racing. I didn't need to prove anything, nor seek approval. I just kept moving forward, occupying the space that had always been denied to me. The power they once held over me simply ceased to exist. The power they had over me evaporated. Over time, Sophie started showing up at my cabin more often. At first, they were quick visits to show me a drawing or tell me something she had seen on the ship. But one afternoon she asked if she could spend the night with me. I made the bed for both of us and prepared some warm tea. We spent hours telling stories, some real, others made up on the spot, laughing until our stomachs hurt. She spoke with a freedom she didn't have when her parents were around. Sophie told me childish secrets, like her fear of the sound of the waves at night and her wish to learn to swim without floaties. I listened to her attentively, treasuring every word. Lying next to me, she held my hand before falling asleep. The room, for the first time, felt full of life and warmth. Before closing her eyes, she whispered with a sleepy smile, "You're my favorite person, Grandma." The next morning, Claire appeared at my cabin, demanding that Sophie return immediately. Her voice was filled with irritation, and she grabbed the girl's arm to pull her away. Sophie, frightened, resisted and shouted, "I want to stay with Grandma." The hallway fell silent. Passengers passing by stopped to watch, some exchanging disapproving looks toward Claire. The moment seemed frozen, each second more embarrassing for her. Aaron wasn't there to intervene, and Claire found herself alone in the situation. Sophie, with tears in her eyes, continued to hold my hand tightly, as if she feared being torn away. It was then that Captain Herrera, drawn by the commotion, approached. He quickly heard both sides and with firmness, authorized Sophie to stay with me that night. The look he gave Claire said more than any verbal reprimand could. As I hugged Sophie, I felt that something much bigger than that momentary argument was happening. In that instant, I felt something was healing. The lounge was elegantly lit, with tables adorned with flowers and silverware lined up with precision. I already knew it would be the last night of the cruise, but I wasn't expecting any special demonstration. However, I was surprised when one of the waiters approached, carrying a bouquet of fresh flowers. He announced in a loud voice that it was a gift from the crew in thanks for my kindness and for being an example of grace during the trip. Around us, passengers began to applaud, and I felt my face grow warm, not with shame but with gratitude. I looked around and saw Claire motionless, her lips pressed together. Aaron beside her lowered his head, avoiding my eyes. Sophie, however, held my hand firmly, smiling with a pride that filled me with strength. There was no theater or obligation in that moment. The attention I was receiving came from sincere hearts, and that made all the difference. It was as if, finally, my presence was being celebrated. And there I realized, this time, I was the center of attention without having to beg for it. Later on the deck, Aaron approached. The wind tousled his hair, and there was a weight in his gaze. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he said in a low tone, almost an apology. I could have taken the opportunity to unload, to list every pain he had caused me. But I didn't want to. I just smiled, not ironically, but with the serenity of someone who finally understood. "But it was," I replied, letting silence fill the rest. We didn't need to continue. Some truths are stronger when they are not drawn out. There was no hatred, only the certainty that I no longer needed to seek validation from him. The approval I had always sought was, after all, within myself. And in that instant I knew I would move on. I forgave him, but I didn't forget. On the morning of disembarkation, the activity was intense. Suitcases being dragged, people saying goodbye with hurried hugs. I had already made my decision and felt no doubt. While Aaron and Claire arranged transportation for everyone, I called a taxi for myself. I didn't announce it. I just let them notice when the time came. Sophie, upon realizing, hugged me tightly without saying a word. My destination was not my house. I was going to the home of an old friend, someone with whom I planned to spend a few days, laughing and resting without the shadow of judgment. The cycle with Aaron was closing there, without the need for slammed doors or harsh words. It was a calm but definitive goodbye to the dynamic that diminished me. I looked at the sea one last time before getting into the car. This time I was choosing my own route. Months later, back in my routine, I sat down at my computer and began to write. The words flowed as if they had been waiting, silently, for the moment to take shape. I wrote about the cruise not as a travel log, but as an honest portrait of discoveries and goodbyes. I sent the text to a blog for mature women without great expectations, only with the desire to record it. To my surprise, the story spread quickly. In a few days, hundreds of comments appeared. Words of support, similar stories, virtual hugs coming from different parts of the world. Each message was proof that my pain had not been isolated. There was an invisible network of similar stories. Moved by this connection, I created a small virtual support group. There, women of different ages shared experiences of exclusion, rebuilding, and courage. Between conversations and advice, we wove bonds that strengthened us day by day. I discovered I was not alone. And, more importantly, I realized that I was now part of those who lift others up, who extend a hand not because they have all the answers, but because they know what it's like to fall. My past had left scars, but it no longer defined my steps. I didn't get lost. I just started over. Like so many of us. Like so many should. Now, I'm curious about you who have listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever gone through something similar? Support the channel by subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing this video. I'm leaving another story on the end screen that you'll also enjoy, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.